TSN CFL insider Dave Naylor next up on the program, and it is our final segment. It is overtime, where we would normally have Darren Dupont in here answering viewer questions, but Nails is moving on in, and if you don't mind, let's bring him on. Dave, I was trying to think is on our CFL radar right now. The commissioner, Randy Ambrosie, has COVID. There's some irony in there somewhere, right? He has to cancel the Montreal trip. Patrick Bourgeon named DB coach of the Ottawa Redblacks. And with Touchdown Atlantic announced last week, people talking about expansion to Atlantic Canada. So there's a little meat on the bone in CFL circles these days.
We got CBA talks that started last week as well. So, the official, now I should be clear, they have been talking for months, exchanging information, kind of the runway. But there is a point where they have to kind of start the clock running, because there's things like, if a certain point you've been negotiating, there's options that you can go to try to solve it or settle it. But I believe the middle of last week was the first meeting that actually qualifies as an official formal CBA negotiation. The process has begun.
Dave, you are more of a CFL historian than me, and I consider myself somewhat of one. Are we correct in saying there has never been a labor stoppage in CFL history? That's why I don't get too geeked up over these CBA talks.
No, there was one out of the 70s. I believe there was a couple of days delay to the start of training camp. There's never been a game missed. And to your point, Rod, I agree with this. There's going to be saber rattling. There's going to be, last time they settled the deal and then 24 hours later it was off, and we had this kind of period where we weren't sure. Look, there's a reason there hasn't been a work stoppage in pro football, period, since 1987, right? And it's because there are two things that make a football strike very, very, very difficult, or work stoppage of any kind. One is that football is a pyramid when it comes to salaries, right? You've got a handful of players that make really good salaries relative to their sport, whether we're talking CFL or NFL. Economies of scale are different, of course. And then you've got most of the players that make, average money or below average money. And there's so many more of them than there are guys that are making $400,000, $500,000 in the CFL or making $30 million in the NFL. There's so many $600,000 guys in the NFL. There are so many $75,000 guys in the CFL. And it's really hard to take guys that are making minimum salaries and ask them to go to the wall and miss a year, in a sport that they could be out of in a couple of years. And that's the other dynamic, that careers are so short in professional football that asking the player to miss a year, you're asking the average player to sit out a quarter of his career. So those are the two things that I really come back to. And I agree with you. I don't think we're going to miss any football this spring, but there's always a bumpy road to getting there.
Is there as much money to go around as used to? They've been through, you got to say, the most perilous stretch in CFL history, and they've been through a lot. What do you know about the dollars and cents of the league right now?
I don't think the salary cap's going up, or to any significant degree. I think the owners are going to go into this session, telling the players about what they've been through and what they've had to invest and the things that they've had to cut and the money that they've lost over the last 2 years. Someone said to me today, we haven't had a regular season in 3 years. They've missed 2 seasons, one completely missed and one from a revenue point of view. Unless you were in Saskatchewan or Winnipeg, the revenue wouldn't have looked anything like it does at a regular time. So I think that's going to be tough for the players to negotiate against, just because the owners have reached into their pockets, and community-owned teams have had to do creative things. I think the model is going to be, let's find a starting point. Let's identify the areas of this we think we can grow together, and let's do a partnership where, as we grow, you grow with us. I think that's going to be what the league takes into the CBA as kind of its lead philosophical proposal.
Well, Dave, we've had a great time broadcasting the show from Calgary. Huff's been down on location at the casino where we do it, a couple of assistant coaches. And the one thing Huff said was, we are back to business as normal in the CFL, business-wise. And that's got to feel good. Are you getting that sense from everybody?
Yeah, just around the combine and such that we just had here in Toronto, and having football conversations with people, it does feel like ordinary time, because I'm having football conversations. I'm having conversations that COVID isn't even coming up in. It does feel like it's almost like we woke up from a dream, Rod. And I think it is going to be same old in terms of what we see on the surface, right? I think the sport is going to, in terms of the way the teams do business, and I think we see some room for improvement. I mean, we heard the commissioner and a lot of the team presidents and things talk about things they've learned during the downtime and things they want to implement. I think last year was a bit of a survival season, and maybe about the Genius Sports deal and other things that I think we're going to see evidence of as it rolls along. But yeah, very much. I think this is a back to normal season. It's also a very important season for the league football wise. We've all gone through this conversation about what happened to the game. I have never subscribed to one theory about what happened to the game last year, but I've been pretty honest about what I thought of the game overall last year. It was not up to the standard that CFL fans are used to, and I think that was apparent. The question is why, and I think there's multiple reasons for it. Some of which I think had to do with some of the pandemic, and some that didn't. But they're going to make some tweaks to the game. I think it's going to be an important year for the league to be entertaining football-wise, or I don't think we're going to go back to the 4 downs conversation. I think the league's kind of been there, done that. I don't think we're going there again next offseason, probably no matter what happens. But I think the tweaking of the game will continue if the entertainment product doesn't respond the way people hope it will.
From one of the viewers, John Ohm in Winnipeg watching, he says, Dave, what's the reason the CFL keeps going to the Atlantic for a CFL game?
Well, I got to be honest. This one caught me by surprise when we got the tip that this was happening, and it was I didn't. The group that is behind the Atlantic Schooners has been fairly quiet, at least to my knowledge, over the time of the pandemic for obvious reasons. They got bigger issues to sort out at Halifax City Council, the province of Nova Scotia. The world's coming back. It's not just the CFL. But the fact that they're willing to plant the flag in Nova Scotia this quickly did catch me by surprise a little bit. And I'm going to refer to our reporter out in Atlantic, Canada, Paul Hollingsworth, who's our TSN guy out there, who does great work for us. He called me after the news conference and everything, and he said, this is just my vibe, my sense, but this seemed to be about more than just a game, than one game. Like this seemed like there's really big kind of dreams and hopes and goals associated with this, because I didn't know what to think of it when this first came along. I was like, hey, wait a minute, they were supposed to do one of these in 2020. That was going to be at St. Mary's, I believe, in Halifax. It didn't happen because of the pandemic. And since then, there really hasn't been a lot of chat about Halifax. But just I'm passing you on just kind of his sense or what his instinct said about the way the people with the Canadian Football League who were out there in Atlantic Canada for the announcement. It just felt, and this is his interpretation, it felt like they weren't there just to have a game this summer, that there is a much sort of larger thing going on there. And I think it's obvious, to your listener's question. I mean, there's only one place really, I think, in Canada to add a 10th team. I think it is Atlantic Canada. I think the league sees, a win-win there in terms of football-wise, having 2 5-team divisions. I think they see it sponsorship and business-wise in terms of completing the national map. And I think having real tangible growth in the CFL at this time would be, I think, both from a realistic point of view, an actual point of view, and just perception-wise, I think would be important. So I'm kind of excited to see where this goes after going to sleep for a couple of years for obvious reasons.
Viewer Colin in Ottawa has a question. What are the chances Trey Ford actually goes to the NFL? Is this like the Nathan Rourke last year where the Canadian quarterback is overhyped and the NFL shows no interest?
Okay. I was at Trey Ford's pro day in Buffalo about 2 weeks ago where there were, 24 NFL teams roughly that were represented to see him. I've talked to Chris Bertoia, his head coach, who's talked to how much interest there is from NFL teams. I'm going a little bit here by the consensus of CFL scouts that were that day at the University of Buffalo. I mean, I talked to a lot of them. And the consensus was that they didn't think Trey Ford would be available to the CFL this summer. They think he's going to get into a camp, which, coming from the University of Waterloo, as a guy who's only played 6 regular season games the last 2 years because of the missed season in 2020, that in itself is an accomplishment. There is a mountain to climb after that before you get to taking a live snap in an NFL regular season game. I mean, look at where most of the quarterbacks of the league right now come from. They are top of the draft pretty much across the board. There's exceptions, but I think there's probably more quarterbacks that are taken near the top of the draft playing in the NFL than there's ever been. I did a little measurement of this last year compared to 10 or 20 years ago. There's fewer Jeff Garcias, there's fewer Kurt Warners. There just aren't as many of those kind of guys in the NFL. That's one thing. And two is just coming from the level that he's coming from, against the competition he's coming from, playing a different game, and again, not had that much playing experience the last 2 years. All those things are going to work against him, which brings us to the question is, will he be asked to take a position change? And I think that's possible as well. He's physically, matches up well enough to play other positions on the field. So, I think he will get interest. I expect he'll be in a camp. I will be surprised if he ever takes a live snap in an NFL game. And that's not a knock on him. It's just knowing, look how thinly worn the path is from U Sport quarterback to the NFL, right? Michael O'Connor got into a weekend minicamp with Seattle. Before that, you got to go Dan Faraday, 1982, Cincinnati, Jamie Bone, 1980, Dallas. Larry Gistanis got invited to the NFL Combine in 95 but didn't get signed by anybody. It's just such a thinly worn path. I think the difference between interest and opportunity and actually being able to convert that opportunity, and again, most of these things are out of his control. It's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, like you say, isn't it interesting? More Canadians than ever in the NFL, but not quarterbacks. Dave, great to see you, as always. Love the conversation. Lots of things to talk about in the CFL. Appreciate it, man. Keep in touch.
Anytime, Rod. Keep up the good work. Good to join you.
Think about TSN CFL insider Dave Naylor from the Big Smoke. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching the RP Show on YouTube. And don't forget, we're live daily on YouTube from noon to 2 Eastern. If you like what you see, hit subscribe. And if you like the program, check around for other segments of The Rod Pedersen Show here on YouTube.